If you have been around bikes long enough, you know one thing for sure. A machine that sits too long starts to go bad, no matter how new it looks. Now take that idea and walk into a dealership. Look closely at the bikes that have not moved in months. Those are not just unsold units. Those are machines already on the clock, fuel breaking down, batteries getting weaker, seals drying out, quiet damage, day by day. And the worst part is, nobody wants to admit it, because the second they do, the price on that tag stops making sense. What looks like fresh inventory starts looking like aging stock that should have been gone a long time ago. Stay till the end, because once you see what is happening behind those showroom prices, you will never look at a dealership the same way again. You start noticing the same bikes. You walk into a dealership you've known for years, and something feels off. The floor is full, but it feels lifeless. The same bikes are still there, same positions, same tags, even a hint of dust. You come back later. Nothing has changed. That is when you realize nothing is moving. Here's the part nobody says out loud. Those bikes are not sitting because nobody wants them. They are sitting because the system behind that showroom keeps pushing more machines in than the market can actually take out. Dealers are not just ordering what they can sell. They are taking what they have to take and holding more than they can realistically move. The problem isn't empty demand. It's forced supply piling up faster than it clears. Once you see it that way, the whole floor looks different. Those bikes are not inventory waiting for buyers. They are pressure waiting to be released. And the longer they sit, the more that pressure builds under the surface. A closer look at the way these lots are being explained starts to raise even more questions. The story doesn't match what you see. You hear the same explanation every time. Seasonal slowdown, market adjustment, buyers waiting for better timing. It all sounds reasonable on paper, but then you look around the showroom again, and it doesn't line up. A seasonal slowdown doesn't leave the same units sitting for months without movement. It doesn't freeze inventory in place like that. The discount signs are there, but they feel half-hearted. Numbers shaved just enough to look like effort, not enough to actually move machines. If a dealer truly needed bikes gone, you would see urgency. You would see prices that force action. Instead, everything looks controlled, almost calm, like nothing is wrong. That disconnect is what sticks with you. Staff still greet you the same way. Same tone, same pitch, same routine. No sign of pressure in how they talk. No urgency in how they sell, but you can see it in the bikes themselves. They are telling a different story. When something doesn't match what you're seeing, you stop trusting the explanation. That's when the doubt sets in. Not about one dealership, but about the whole pattern. Because once you notice it in one place, you start seeing it everywhere. Different cities, different brands, same situation, full floors, slow movement, quiet tension underneath. And once that pattern becomes clear, the question shifts. It's no longer about why bikes aren't selling. It becomes about what is actually being pushed into the system behind the scenes. If you're seeing this in your area too, hit like so this reaches more riders, subscribe for real breakdowns like this, and share what you're noticing out there. Because what's happening right now isn't being talked about clearly anywhere else. This isn't about buyers disappearing. Riders didn't vanish. You still see bikes on the road every day. You still hear stories of long trips, weekend runs, and guys putting real miles on their machines. The interest in riding didn't disappear. It just moved somewhere else. Used bikes are still changing hands. Private sales are still happening. The demand is there. It's just not flowing through dealerships the way it used to. That's where the misunderstanding starts. People assume empty sales numbers mean people stopped wanting motorcycles. That's not what's happening. What changed is where those buyers are willing to spend their money. When new bikes sit too long and prices stay high, riders look for alternatives, and they find them. The real issue is supply being forced into a market that isn't absorbing it at the same pace. More units are arriving than leaving, not because nobody rides, but because the channel they're being sold through is out of sync with how people are actually buying. That mismatch is what creates the pileup. Once supply outruns demand in a controlled system, it doesn't correct itself quickly. It lingers, it builds, it spreads across locations, and the longer it goes on, the harder it becomes to reverse without someone taking a loss. At that point, the situation isn't about slow sales anymore, it's about accumulation. And accumulation has consequences that don't show up right away, but they always show up eventually. Once the bikes start stacking, it compounds. When inventory stops moving, time starts working against everything on that floor. New shipments still come in, contracts are already in place, allocations are already set. So while older bikes sit, newer ones arrive right behind them. The line keeps growing, even though the exit isn't clearing. That is where the compounding begins. Every unsold unit becomes part of a larger problem. Space fills up. Costs build quietly in the background. Attention gets divided between moving old inventory and making room for new arrivals. And the longer that balance is off, the harder it becomes to fix without drastic action. You start seeing subtle signs of strain. Bikes pushed closer together, overflow areas being used more often, units stored off-site just to keep the main floor presentable. None of it looks like collapse from the outside, but underneath, it's pressure stacking layer by layer. That's when the situation shifts from something manageable into something heavier. Because once the buildup reaches a certain point, it stops being about selling bikes and starts being about surviving what's already there. Every bike carries a clock. The moment a motorcycle rolls off the truck and onto the showroom floor, something starts ticking. You don't hear it, and nobody points it out, but it's there all the same. That machine is no longer just a product waiting for a buyer. It becomes a timed piece of inventory with a cost attached to every single day it sits. That bike's not waiting, it's counting. Time becomes the real enemy, not mileage, not wear, not use. A bike that isn't being ridden is still moving in one direction, and that direction is toward becoming a problem. From day one, the expectation is that it will sell within a certain window. That window is not generous. It's built around movement, turnover, and flow. When that flow stops, the clock doesn't. Inventory isn't neutral in this environment. It's not like a tool sitting on a shelf until someone needs it. It behaves more like a meter running in the background. The longer it stays, the more pressure it creates. And that pressure doesn't wait for the right buyer or the right season. It just keeps building quietly. One day at a time. You can stand in front of a brand new motorcycle, flawless paint, clean chrome, untouched tires, and think it's fresh. But behind that clean surface, time has already started working against it. The system doesn't care how new it looks. It only cares how long it's been there. A different kind of damage begins to show up the longer that clock runs. Sitting still is worse than being ridden. There's a strange truth about motorcycles that most people outside the garage don't think about. A machine that's being ridden regularly can stay healthy for years. Fluids move, seals stay conditioned, components stay active. But a machine that sits too long without movement begins to decline in ways that aren't immediately obvious. A motorcycle sitting on a showroom floor looks perfect. No miles, no wear, no visible damage, but underneath, things are slowly changing. Fuel begins to degrade. Batteries lose strength. Tires develop subtle flat spots. None of it announces itself right away. It's quiet, gradual, almost invisible, unless you know what to look for. Compare that to a bike that's been ridden. Even with miles on it, it often feels more alive. Systems have been exercised. Parts have stayed in motion. The difference isn't always in appearance. It's in condition. And condition is what matters when you finally throw a leg over it. That's the problem with inventory that sits too long. It starts to lose value without showing it. From the outside, it still looks like a brand new machine. Inside, it's aging in ways that don't reverse themselves easily. And once that process begins, it doesn't stop just because someone finally buys it. An experienced rider can feel that difference almost immediately. Something slightly off. Not broken, not wrong, just not right. That's the result of time working in the background while the bike stood still. Behind all of that physical stillness, there's a financial layer building that most people never see. The cost builds. Where you don't see it, the real damage in this situation doesn't show up on the surface. It doesn't come from scratches, worn parts, or visible wear. It builds in the background, in numbers that never make it onto a showroom tag. Interest, overhead, and compounding cost are all working quietly behind every bike that sits too long. Each unit carries a financial weight from the moment it arrives. That weight doesn't stay constant. It grows over time. Day after day, the cost attached to that bike increases, even though nothing about it has changed physically. It's still the same machine, but it's becoming more expensive to hold. That's what makes this kind of pressure so dangerous. It's not one big hit that forces a decision. It's a slow bleed. You don't feel it all at once. You feel it over weeks, then months, until it reaches a point where it can't be ignored anymore. By then, the options are limited. Overhead adds another layer. Space, staffing, utilities, all tied to inventory that isn't moving. The more units that sit, the more resources they consume without generating anything in return. It creates a gap between what's coming in and what's going out, and that gap widens the longer the situation continues. From the outside, everything can still look stable. Lights are on, doors are open, bikes are lined up clean and polished. But underneath, the numbers are shifting in the wrong direction. And once that shift reaches a certain point, it forces decisions that wouldn't have been considered under normal conditions. There's a deeper force in play that keeps the cycle moving, even when everyone involved knows something isn't right. They can't just stop. From the outside, it seems like an easy solution. If inventory isn't moving, stop bringing in more bikes, let the floor clear, reset the balance. But that's not how this system works. Dealers don't operate in isolation. They're tied into a structure that depends on continuous flow, whether the market is ready for it or not. Manufacturer pressure plays a major role here. Allocations are set based on expectations, not current reality. Dealers who want to maintain their standing, their access to future models, and their relationship with the brand can't simply opt out. Refusing inventory doesn't just solve a short-term problem. It risks long-term consequences. That creates a dependency that's hard to step away from. Even when the signs are clear, even when the numbers don't look right, the system keeps moving forward. Shipments continue. Inventory builds. And the cycle repeats itself, not because it makes sense in the moment, but because breaking it carries its own risks. So the flow continues. Not because everything is working, but because stopping isn't as simple as it looks. They see the problem, they understand the pressure, but stepping out of it isn't something they can do without consequences of their own. It doesn't collapse loudly. When a dealership finally reaches the point where it can't hold on anymore, it doesn't look the way people expect. There's no dramatic shutdown, no big announcement, no moment where everything stops at once. What actually happens is much quieter. Cash flow tightens, payments get harder to make, decisions get delayed. Then one day, things just stop moving forward. Most places don't go out with a bang. They go out slowly, piece by piece, until there's nothing left to keep going. Staff hours get cut before anyone says the word closure. Inventory stops rotating before anyone admits there's a problem. The lights stay on, the doors stay open, but something behind the scenes has already shifted. From the outside, it can still look like business as usual. Bikes are lined up, sales desks are staffed, the showroom is clean. But underneath that surface, the numbers aren't holding anymore. What used to work week to week starts falling short. And once that gap opens, it doesn't close on its own. The final stretch isn't about growth or even stability. It's about holding on long enough to see if something changes. When it doesn't, the outcome becomes unavoidable. Not because of one bad decision, but because the pressure that's been building for months finally reaches a point where it can't be carried anymore. A shift in control follows quickly. Once that point is reached, control slips away. When payments stop or fall behind, control begins to move away from the people you see in the showroom. Decisions that used to be made at a desk in the building are no longer made there. They shift to the entities tied to the financial side of the inventory. And once that happens, everything changes. That inventory was never really theirs. It may have been displayed, maintained, and sold through the dealership, but the financial claim on it sits elsewhere. When things are running smoothly, that distinction doesn't matter. When they're not, it becomes the most important detail in the entire situation. Ownership, in a practical sense, starts to shift. Not in a visible way at first, but in terms of who has authority over what happens next. The people inside the dealership can no longer make decisions freely. Every move becomes tied to obligations that are now out of their hands. You can still walk in and see the same bike sitting there, but the control over those machines has already changed. What happens to them next is no longer decided by the people who brought them in. It's decided by those who have a financial stake in recovering what they can. What follows that shift is fast, precise, and rarely visible to anyone outside. The process. If you want to stay ahead of what's really happening in the motorcycle market and avoid paying more than you should, subscribe now, because the next shifts are already starting, and knowing where things are going will matter more than ever soon. The recovery happens fast. Once control moves, the response is immediate. There's no waiting period, no slow adjustment. The process that follows is structured, efficient, and focused on one goal: identifying and securing what's there. It starts with audits. Every bike is accounted for, checked, and verified against records. Inventory that looked like a display a day earlier becomes a list of assets that need to be managed. Serial numbers are matched, conditions are noted, locations are confirmed. It's not about selling anymore, it's about understanding exactly what exists exists and what can be recovered. The pace is what surprises most people. What felt slow and stagnant before suddenly moves quickly. Actions that might have taken weeks under normal circumstances happen in days, sometimes hours. The goal isn't presentation or customer experience, it's clarity and control. From the outside, very little of this is visible. There are no public notices explaining each step. The showroom doesn't suddenly empty overnight. But behind the scenes, everything is being prepared for movement. Decisions are made based on efficiency, not perception. Once that process begins, the bikes don't stay where they were for long. The bikes keep moving, just not where you look. After everything has been accounted for, the inventory doesn't just disappear. It moves, not back through the same showroom path, and not in a way most riders ever see. The direction changes completely. Instead of waiting for walk-in buyers, those bikes are routed through channels designed for speed and efficiency. Auctions become one of the primary paths, not the kind open to casual buyers, but structured environments where dealers and insiders participate. Units are grouped, priced to move, and processed in ways that prioritize clearing inventory over maximizing visibility. What sat for months can change hands in a matter of minutes. Dealer networks pick up another portion. Bikes move from one location to another, often far from where they originally sat. A unit that couldn't sell in one market might be placed into another, where conditions are different. The same machine, same model, same condition, just a different setting. Redistribution channels handle the rest. Storage facilities, regional hubs, and secondary markets all play a role in absorbing what the original dealership couldn't move. The path becomes less visible, more fragmented, and much harder to track from the outside. By the time those bikes show up again in a place you recognize, they've already been through a chain of decisions most riders never witness. And understanding that chain is where the difference between guessing and knowing starts to matter. The price you see isn't the real price. Walk into a dealership today and the number on the tag still looks firm, clean, official, unchanged. It gives the impression that nothing has moved. But once you've seen how inventory actually behaves behind the scenes, that number stops meaning what it used to. Sticker price stopped being the truth a while ago. MSRP was built for a world where inventory flowed smoothly. Bikes arrived, sold, and cleared space for the next shipment. In that kind of system, the sticker made sense. It represented a balance between supply and demand that held steady enough to be predictable. That balance is gone now, even if the tags haven't caught up. Hidden discounts exist, but they don't show up the way people expect. They're not always printed on signs or advertised openly. They show up in conversations, in timing, in situations where movement matters more than appearance. What you see on the floor is often a starting point, not a reflection of what the bike is actually worth. In that moment. That's why two identical motorcycles can carry the same price on paper and move at completely different numbers in reality. One sits because the price feels fixed. The other moves because someone understood the pressure behind it. The difference isn't the machine, it's the context around it. A small group already moves through this market with that understanding. Some people already figured this out. There are buyers who don't walk into a showroom expecting the listed price to be the final word. They don't rely on signs or promotions to tell them what something is worth. They watch patterns. They pay attention to how long inventory sits. And when the moment lines up, they move. Independent buyers who understand this shift approach the market differently. They're not chasing the newest release or the loudest announcement. They're looking for pressure points, places where inventory has aged just enough to matter, where the cost behind it has started to outweigh the need to hold firm on price. Some dealers operate in that same space, not the ones tied tightly into fixed systems, but the ones who move through auctions and secondary channels. They see inventory as something to turn quickly, not something to display indefinitely. Their pricing reflects that difference, even if it isn't advertised in a way that stands out immediately. The advantage here isn't about getting lucky, it's about recognizing when conditions shift in your favor. When enough bikes sit long enough, when enough pressure builds quietly, the balance starts to tilt. And those who notice it early don't need to chase deals. They step into them. That awareness leads to a different way of approaching the search entirely, where you should actually be looking. If you approach this market the same way it worked years ago, you'll miss what's right in front of you. Walking into the nearest showroom and focusing only on what's new or prominently displayed doesn't tell the full story. anymore. The real opportunities sit in places most people overlook. Aged inventory is one of those places. Bikes that have been sitting longer than they should carry a different kind of weight. Not visible on the surface, but present in how they're handled, how they're discussed, and how flexible the situation becomes around them. Time changes their position, even if it doesn't change their appearance. Closing dealerships create another opening. Not in a dramatic, last-minute rush, but in the weeks leading up to it. When pressure builds and decisions shift, priorities change. Moving units becomes more important than holding firm. Those moments don't last long, and they don't announce themselves clearly. You either see them or you don't. Timing matters more than brand loyalty in this environment. The idea that one name always holds its value or commands its price doesn't hold the same way when inventory pressure enters the equation. A well-timed move on the right unit can matter more than chasing a specific badge. All of this points toward a bigger realization about how the system was built in the first place. The system was never built for this. The dealership model was designed for movement, constant flow, steady turnover, predictable demand. Everything about it assumes that bikes will come in and go out at a pace that keeps the balance intact. When that balance holds, the system works. When it doesn't, the weaknesses start to show. What we're seeing now isn't a sudden failure. It's a system running under conditions it was never meant to handle for long. Inventory staying in place instead of moving through breaks, the assumptions everything else depends on. Once that happens, the pressure that was supposed to stay temporary becomes permanent. Under normal conditions, small imbalances correct themselves. A slow month is followed by a strong one. Inventory builds slightly, then clears. That rhythm is what keeps everything stable. Without it, the buildup doesn't resolve. It accumulates. Once you start noticing it, you see it everywhere. Floors that look full but feel stuck. Bikes that should have moved weeks ago still sitting there like nothing has changed. And when enough of that builds up, the story behind the market starts to shift in a way most people miss. If you have seen this happening where you are, drop a comment and share what you are noticing. I want to hear your experience. If this gave you a clearer look at what is really going on, hit like and subscribe for more straight, no BS breakdowns like this.